What happens when the person you illegally detain out of sheer prejudice turns out to be one of the most powerful military commanders in the United States? Officer Bradley Jenkins thought he had caught a nobody, a quiet woman in a worn hoodie he could bully to inflate his own ego. He was dead wrong. This is the story of ultimate karma, where a 4-star general taught a corrupt airport cop an unforgettable lesson in power, prejudice, and accountability. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport pulsed like a living city that never truly slept. Steel and glass stretched in every direction, a labyrinth of moving walkways, distant jet roars, and the endless shuffle of humanity. It was 11:38 p.m. on a muggy Tuesday in mid-June, the kind of heavy southern night where the air inside the terminal felt thick with exhaustion and stale coffee. Delayed passengers dragged rolling suitcases like anchors, their faces etched with the particular fatigue of travel gone wrong. General Sarah Mitchell just wanted to go home. At 52, she had spent more than 3 decades climbing the treacherous, male-dominated ranks of the United States Army. She had commanded battalions through the dust and danger of Afghanistan, orchestrated sweeping logistical transformations at the Pentagon, and only 3 weeks earlier had been quietly pinned with her 4th star in a small ceremony few outside her inner circle knew about. She was one of the highest-ranking military officers in the free world, a black woman who had shattered ceiling after ceiling with quiet competence and iron resolve. But tonight she did not look like a 4-star general. There was no aide-de-camp trailing behind her. No impeccably pressed dress blues heavy with ribbons and medals. Tonight she was simply Sarah, faded gray zip-up hoodie over a plain black t-shirt, comfortable dark denim jeans, and scuffed running shoes. Her hair, normally pulled into a strict regulation bun, hung in a loose, messy ponytail. She carried only a battered olive-drab duffel bag, a relic from her early days at Fort Bragg. She had chosen to fly commercial, a rare personal decision made so she could visit her ailing mother in Chicago without the fanfare, security detail, and press that usually shadowed her every move. She blended in perfectly. And in America, blending in while being a black woman in a worn hoodie often meant becoming invisible, or worse, becoming the wrong kind of visible. Officer Bradley Jenkins belonged to the latter school of thought. A 12-year veteran of the airport police, Jenkins was a man who had peaked in high school and spent every year since desperately trying to claw back that vanished sense of authority. He carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed his badge made him larger than the people he policed. Among his colleagues, he had a reputation as a hard charger, a polite euphemism for a bully who thrived on intimidation and the small, cruel victories of broken spirits. He paced the perimeter of Terminal T's security checkpoint, thumbs hooked into his duty belt, eyes scanning the thinning crowd for anyone who failed to match his narrow, prejudiced vision of a respectable traveler. When his gaze landed on Sarah, his internal alarms, calibrated by years of unchecked bias, sounded loud and clear. He saw a black woman traveling alone, dressed down, looking tired, carrying a beat-up bag. In his mind, she had no business in the priority security lane, even though she held a first-class ticket bought with her own money. Sarah stood quietly in the TSA pre-check line, eyes heavy with fatigue, checking the time on a simple black watch. She only wanted to clear security, find a quiet gate, and sleep. "Excuse me," a sharp, grating voice cut through the ambient hum. Sarah did not look up immediately. She assumed the voice was not meant for her and shifted the duffel higher on her shoulder, taking a small step forward in the queue. "Hey, excuse me, lady." A heavy hand clamped down on her shoulder and yanked her backward with enough force to make her stumble. Sarah's combat instincts ignited instantly. Years of training in close-quarters battles surged through her veins, a reflex to neutralize threats. But iron discipline held. She steadied herself, turned slowly, and found herself face to chest with Officer Jenkins. He was a large man, his uniform straining at the buttons, face flushed with the effort of his own manufactured authority. He loomed over her, a deliberate tactic meant to physically dominate. "Can I help you, officer?" Sarah asked. Her voice was calm, level, and entirely free of the fear he was used to provoking. "You're in the wrong line," Jenkins stated, not as a question, but as fact. He pointed a thick finger toward the standard security queue, already snaking around stanchions several times over. "Coach and standby are over there. This line is for priority passengers." Sarah met his eyes, her dark gaze analyzing the situation with the same cold, calculating precision she had once used to assess Taliban positions in Afghan valleys. She noted the absence of ma'am. She noted the unwarranted physical contact. She noted the sneer and the absolute certainty in his face that she was beneath him. "I'm in the correct line, officer," she replied smoothly, reaching into her pocket for her boarding pass. She held it out so he could see the bold, first class, and TSA pre-check printed on the heavy paper. Jenkins did not even glance at it. He made a wet, dismissive sound. "Right, let me see some ID." "On what grounds?" Sarah asked, her tone shifting from polite to firm. She was not argumentative, merely precise. "I have not committed a crime, nor have I given you reasonable suspicion that I am about to commit one. I am simply waiting to board my flight." Jenkins's face darkened. The flush on his neck climbed higher. He was not accustomed to being questioned, especially not by someone he had already filed away as subservient. The fact that she was articulate, calm, and knew her rights only enraged him further. "I don't need grounds to verify the identity of a suspicious person in a secured airport terminal," he barked, raising his voice deliberately so nearby passengers would hear. "Hand over your ID or I'm pulling you out of this line and detaining you for interfering with an investigation." Sarah drew a slow breath. She could end this in seconds. One flash of her Department of Defense identification card with its 4 silver stars, and Jenkins would shrink into nothing. One phone call to the chief of airport police and his badge would be gone before her flight departed. But as she looked at him and then at the other minority passengers in nearby lines, watching with the familiar, quiet dread of people who had seen this before, she made a deliberate tactical choice. If this was how he treated her when he believed she was a nobody, how many others had he harassed? How many people without her rank, her resources, her power had been humiliated, detained, or worse because of this man's prejudice? She would not pull rank, not yet. She would let him dig his own grave, and she would map every inch of it. "Fine," she said quietly, pulling her civilian driver's license from her wallet and handing it over. "My name is Sarah Mitchell." Jenkins snatched the license, shining his tactical flashlight directly into her eyes, despite the bright terminal lights. "Sarah Mitchell," he muttered, squinting between the photo and her face as though she were a master of disguise. "Where are you headed, Sarah?" "Chicago, to visit family." "Is that right?" He tapped the license against his palm. "And how exactly did you afford a first-class ticket to Chicago? You don't look like you're flying first class." The audacity of the question hung in the air like smoke. At the nearest podium, a young Hispanic TSA agent named Brenda Hodges paused her work, eyes widening at the blatant disrespect. "My financial status is none of your concern, officer," Sarah replied, her voice dropping a fraction, carrying the subtle, crushing weight of command. "I have provided identification. I have shown my boarding pass. I would like to proceed to my gate." "You'll proceed when I tell you to proceed," Jenkins snapped, stepping closer, invading her space. "Grab your bag. You're coming with me for additional screening." The atmosphere in Terminal T changed. The low murmur of phones and luggage ceased, replaced by a tense electric silence. Dozens of eyes locked onto the confrontation. Jenkins grabbed the strap of Sarah's olive drab duffel. Her hand shot out like a vice around the heavy canvas handle, stopping him cold. "I can carry my own bag," she said, voice low and warning. For a split second, Jenkins looked startled by her strength. He yanked his hand back and covered the surprise with a scowl. "Then carry it. Step out of the line. Over there against the wall." Sarah stepped out of the queue, posture straight despite the casual clothes. She moved with a quiet, undeniable dignity that only irritated Jenkins more. He wanted her to cower, to cry, to cause a scene that would justify his aggression. Instead, she stood against the wall, hands loose at her sides, watching him with an unnerving, analytical calm. "Empty your pockets," he ordered loudly. "Am I under arrest?" "You're being detained for suspicious behavior." "Define suspicious," she countered. "Standing quietly or holding a first-class ticket while black?" A low murmur rippled through the onlookers. A middle-aged white man in a business suit 2 lanes over shook his head in disgust and raised his smartphone to record. Jenkins noticed the camera. His posture stiffened. Rather than de-escalate, his ego demanded he double down. He had to prove he was right. "Watch your mouth," he snarled, pointing a finger inches from her nose. "You think you can play the race card with me? I know your type. You come in here wearing rags, trying to sneak into priority lanes, probably carrying stolen goods or narcotics. People like you think the rules don't apply." Sarah did not blink. "People like me," she repeated softly. "Yeah, trash." Jenkins spat the word, lowering his voice just enough that the cameras might miss it. But Sarah heard it clearly. Brenda Hodges stepped forward tentatively. "Officer Jenkins, the passenger's ID cleared the scanner. She's legitimate. We can just run her through." "Back off, Hodges," Jenkins barked, turning his fury on the young agent. "I handle law enforcement here. You just look at x-rays. This woman fits a profile, and I'm doing a thorough search." He turned back to Sarah. "Open the bag. Dump it on the floor." "No," Sarah said simply. Jenkins blinked. "What did you say?" "I said no. If you want to search my property, you will need a warrant or probable cause that a crime has been committed. Being a black woman with a first-class ticket is not a crime in the state of Georgia or under federal law. I am airport security. I have jurisdiction." "You are airport police," Sarah corrected, her knowledge of jurisdictional law flawless. "TSA has authority for administrative searches at the checkpoint. You, as a sworn law enforcement officer, are bound by the Fourth Amendment. Unless I am under arrest, I am not opening this bag." Jenkins was seething. He was losing control, and he knew it. The crowd had turned against him. The man recording spoke up. "Leave her alone, man. She hasn't done anything." "Interfere with an investigation and you'll be arrested too," Jenkins yelled at the bystander. He turned back to Sarah, hand resting aggressively on the butt of his taser. "You think you're smart? You think because you memorized some legal jargon you can disrespect an officer of the law? You're coming to the back room now." "Are you forcefully relocating me against my will?" Sarah asked, making sure her voice carried to the recording phones. "Because if I am not under arrest, forcing me into a secondary location constitutes unlawful detention and false imprisonment." Jenkins grabbed her arm, fingers digging hard into her bicep. "Move." Sarah could have dropped him in 3 precise strikes. Disarmed, taken him to the floor, restrained him before he realized what happened. But she allowed herself to be led. She committed the pressure of his grip to memory. She memorized his badge number, his nameplate, the exact cadence of his threats. He guided her away from public view down a sterile, brightly lit hallway and shoved her into a small, windowless interrogation room. A metal table and 2 chairs sat in the center. The door clicked shut, cutting off the crowd's murmurs. Jenkins leaned against the door, arms crossed, a smug, triumphant smile spreading across his face. No cameras back here, no witnesses, just you and me. Now you're going to open that bag and answer my questions with yes, sir, and no, sir, or you're not getting on that flight. In fact, you might spend the night in the Fulton County Jail. Sarah stood in the center of the room. She did not sit. She looked at Jenkins with a profound sense of pity and disgust. "Officer Jenkins," she said, her voice echoing slightly. It was no longer the voice of a tired traveler. It was the voice of a commander who had sent thousands of troops into battle, a voice accustomed to absolute obedience. "I highly suggest you think very carefully about your next move. You have bypassed protocol, violated constitutional rights, and engaged in racial profiling. I will give you one opportunity to open that door, apologize, and let me catch my flight." Jenkins let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Are you threatening me? You're nobody in a dirty sweatshirt. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Sarah slowly reached up and pulled the hood of her sweatshirt down, straightening her spine. "No, officer, you have no idea who you are dealing with." The air in the small room felt dense, suffocating under the harsh fluorescent glare. Jenkins chuckled, but the sound was brittle. Something in Sarah's demeanor, the unyielding eye contact, the absolute lack of panic, the way she held her ground, was beginning to unnerve him. He shook it off, feeding on his own anger. "Put the bag on the table," he commanded, stepping forward and slapping his hand hard on the metal surface. "I'm not asking again." Sarah walked to the table, unslung the duffel, and set it down with a heavy thud. She did not open it. "Open it," he barked. "As I stated previously, you do not have my consent to search my belongings," Sarah replied, tone conversational. "If you proceed, you do so in direct violation of my civil rights." "I have probable cause," Jenkins lied, reaching for the zipper. "You were evasive, sweating, refused lawful orders. That's enough." "I am not sweating," Sarah pointed out calmly. "I answered your questions directly, and your orders were not lawful. They were rooted in bias." Jenkins ignored her, yanking the zipper open. He began pulling items out haphazardly and tossing them onto the table. Neatly folded civilian clothes, a heavily annotated copy of The Art of War, a simple black toiletry bag, several manila folders. He sneered at the book. "What is this, trying to look smart?" He ruffled through the clothes, found nothing, then reached into a side pocket. His hand brushed something heavy and metallic. He pulled it out with a triumphant grin. "What do we have here?" He held up a heavy solid bronze coin roughly 2 inches in diameter. "Looks like stolen property, or maybe some kind of gang token. Who did you take this from?" Sarah stared at the object in his hand. It was her personal challenge coin. One side bore the insignia of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The other displayed 4 prominent stars curved over a deeply engraved eagle, and the words General S. Mitchell, Excellence in Command. It was a token she gave only to those she personally deemed worthy of the highest respect. "That does not belong to you," she said, voice dropping to a dangerous quiet register. "I suggest you put it down." Jenkins squinted at the coin in the harsh light. He was not military. He did not understand the significance of a commander's challenge coin, let alone the Joint Chiefs insignia. To him, it was just a fancy piece of metal. "General S. Mitchell," he read aloud, mispronouncing the rank with sarcastic drawl. He looked up at her and laughed cruelly. "General? You? A black woman in a dirty hoodie? What, did you buy this at a pawn shop? Or steal it from some old veteran at a bar?" "It belongs to me," Sarah said, eyes narrowing slightly. "Right, and I'm the President of the United States." Jenkins scoffed and tossed the coin onto the table. It landed with a loud clatter and spun before resting against the manila folders. He grabbed the top folder. The tab read in stark red lettering, "Classified, do not duplicate." It was a briefing packet on global logistical troop movements, sensitive enough to require care, though declassified for her to carry. Sarah's hand slammed down on the folder before Jenkins could open it. The speed and force made him jump back instinctively. "Do not open that," she commanded. This time, the four-star general was fully present in her voice, the voice that had echoed across Pentagon briefing rooms and demanded immediate, unquestioning obedience. "You lack the security clearance to view those documents. If you open that folder, you are committing a federal offense under the Espionage Act." Jenkins swallowed hard, bravado wavering for a fraction of a second. But his fragile ego could not tolerate being ordered by someone he still saw as a suspect. He drew his taser, the red laser sight settling directly on Sarah's chest. "Back up! Back away from the table right now!" he shouted, finger hovering over the trigger. "You're assaulting an officer. You're carrying classified government documents. You're going away for a long, long time, lady." Sarah did not flinch. She looked down at the red dot on her chest, then back up to Jenkins's eyes. She saw the fear behind the anger. He was in over his head, grasping at straws. "I am not assaulting you, Officer Jenkins," she said, voice perfectly even. "I am preventing you from committing a felony. Put the weapon down." "I give the orders here," Jenkins screamed, hand shaking. "Step back against the wall." Slowly, deliberately, Sarah raised her hands to shoulder height, palms open. She took 2 steps back. Jenkins let out a shaky breath, keeping the taser trained on her as he reached out with his free hand and flipped open the manila folder. He stared at the pages, dense military jargon, maps of Eastern Europe marked with unit designations and logistics tables. At the top of the first page, a memo was addressed to General Sarah Mitchell, USA, from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Jenkins read the name again. Then he looked at the driver's license he had confiscated. Sarah Mitchell. He looked at the bronze coin on the table. General S. Mitchell. A cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck. He looked at the woman standing against the wall. She was not cowering. She stood at parade rest, hands clasped behind her back, posture impeccable, watching him with the predatory patience of a hawk observing a cornered rat. Who did you steal this from?" Jenkins stammered. The certainty in his voice was gone, replaced by creeping dread. "You're trying to impersonate a military officer. That's a federal crime." "Officer Jenkins," Sarah said quietly. "Look at my driver's license again. Look at the date of birth. Then look at the date of birth on the military dossier." Jenkins scrambled for the license with a trembling hand and held it beside the first page of the folder. The names matched. The physical descriptions matched. The dates of birth matched. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, this is fake. You're pulling some kind of scam." "My phone is in the front pocket of my bag," Sarah instructed, voice ringing with unquestionable authority. "Take it out." Operating on autopilot, Jenkins reached in and pulled out a heavy encrypted government-issue smartphone. "Press the power button." He did. The lock screen illuminated. Not a family photo, but the official high-resolution seal of the United States Army with a banner. "Property of the U.S. Department of Defense. Authorized access only." "There is a number on the back of the phone on a white sticker," Sarah continued. "It is the direct line to the Pentagon switchboard. Call it. Tell the operator you have detained General Sarah Mitchell and you wish to verify her identity." Jenkins stared at the phone, then at the taser still in his hand. He suddenly realized he was pointing a weapon at a high-ranking official of the United States government. He slowly lowered the taser, mouth dry. "Call the number, officer," Sarah repeated, stepping back to the table. It was not a request. It was a direct, lethal command. Jenkins's hands shook so violently he could barely press the digits. He dialed on his department radio phone. It rang twice. Department of Defense, Pentagon Operations Center. How may I direct your call? A crisp, professional voice answered. Jenkins swallowed hard. Yeah, hi, this is Officer Jenkins, Airport Police, Atlanta. I have a woman here claiming to be a General Sarah Mitchell. There was a brief pause. Then the operator's voice shifted from polite to intensely serious. Officer, please hold, transferring you to the office of the Joint Chiefs. Jenkins felt the blood drain from his face. The line clicked. A deep, authoritative male voice came on. This is Captain David Reynolds, aide-de-camp to General Mitchell. Who am I speaking to? Officer Jenkins, Atlanta Airport Police. Officer Jenkins, Reynolds said sharply. General Mitchell's flight tracking shows she is currently delayed at your security checkpoint. Is she in your custody? She's here, Jenkins stammered. Put her on the phone immediately. Jenkins slowly held the phone out to Sarah. She took it, eyes never leaving his pale, terrified face. David, it's me, she said into the phone. General Mitchell, Reynolds replied, relief evident. Are you all right? We saw the delay. Do we need to dispatch federal agents? That won't be necessary, David, Sarah said softly, watching Jenkins begin to physically shake. Officer Jenkins and I are having a slight misunderstanding regarding constitutional rights and jurisdictional authority. I'll handle it from here. Understood. We are standing by. Sarah hung up and placed the phone gently on the metal table beside her challenge coin. The silence in the room was deafening. The power dynamic had not merely shifted, it had inverted completely, crashing down on Jenkins like a tidal wave. So, General Mitchell said, crossing her arms and leaning slightly forward. Let's talk about profiling, Officer Jenkins. Jenkins looked at the encrypted government phone, then at the heavy bronze coin, then up into the cold, unyielding eyes of General Sarah Mitchell. The silence was no longer merely tense. It was a physical weight pressing on his chest, squeezing the air from his lungs. The manufactured authority he had worn like armor minutes earlier had evaporated, leaving a terrified small man who realized he had just destroyed his own life. General Mitchell, Jenkins whispered, voice cracking. He wiped sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. Ma'am, I had no idea. You have to understand, from my perspective. Stop right there, Sarah interrupted, voice not raised, but carrying the sharp crack of command. Do not insult my intelligence, Officer Jenkins, and do not attempt to justify your actions by claiming ignorance of my rank. She took a slow, deliberate step toward him. Jenkins instinctively stepped back until his shoulders hit the cinder block wall. You did not detain me because you thought I was a civilian, Sarah continued, dark eyes locking onto his. You detained me because you thought I was a civilian you deemed powerless. You didn't see a threat to airport security. You saw a target for your ego. You saw a black woman in a hoodie and calculated that I lacked the resources to fight back. You banked on my silence. No, ma'am, that's not true. You were following your own prejudice, she cut him off smoothly. You bypassed standard TSA protocols. You ignored the verification provided by Agent Hodges. You violated the Fourth Amendment, threatened me with a deadly weapon, and attempted to unlawfully search classified Department of Defense materials. My rank is irrelevant to the crimes you committed tonight. My rank is only relevant because it is the reason you are finally going to face consequences. Before Jenkins could offer another pathetic excuse, the heavy metal door swung open violently, striking the rubber wall stop with a loud crack. Standing in the doorway was a breathless, panicked man in a crisp white command uniform. Captain William Carter, shift commander for the Airport Police Division. Behind him stood Richard Lawson, the night operations director for the Department of Aviation, in an expensive tailored suit. They had not been summoned by Jenkins. They had been summoned by the undeniable reality of modern technology. The crowd outside had been filming. Brenda Hodges, recognizing a liability in the making, had sprinted to the command center. The Pentagon Operations Center had already pinged the federal liaison at Hartsfield-Jackson. Digital alarms had sounded across 3 agencies in less than 10 minutes. Captain Carter took one look at the scene. His patrol officer sweating against the wall. A casually dressed black woman standing with impeccable military posture. A table littered with classified documents and a 4-star challenge coin. "Officer Jenkins," Carter barked, face flushed with rage and profound embarrassment. "What in God's name is going on here? Secure your weapon and step away from the passenger." "Captain, I can explain," Jenkins stammered, hands fluttering near his duty belt. "I was conducting a routine secondary screening based on suspicious—" "Shut your mouth, Jenkins," Carter roared, stepping into the room. He turned to Sarah, posture instantly shifting to intense deference. He had already been briefed by a furious Department of Defense liaison. "General Mitchell, I am Captain William Carter. I cannot begin to express my profound apologies for this situation. Are you unharmed, ma'am?" "I am physically unharmed, Captain," Sarah replied evenly, picking up her challenge coin and rolling it thoughtfully across her knuckles. "However, I cannot say the same for the integrity of your precinct." Richard Lawson stepped forward, wiping his brow with a silk handkerchief. He knew the airport's general manager, Kenneth Harlan, and the office of Mayor Andre Dickens would be breathing down his neck by morning if this reached the press. A 4-star general unlawfully detained by a rogue cop was a public relations catastrophe. "General, I assure you this is an isolated incident," Lawson pleaded smoothly, offering a placating smile. Hartsfield-Jackson prides itself on treating all passengers with dignity. Officer Jenkins has severely deviated from our operational standards. If you are willing, we can escort you to the VIP Delta Sky Club, get you on your flight to Chicago, and handle this internal matter quietly. Sarah looked at Lawson, expression unreadable. She recognized the bureaucratic pivot, the desperate scramble to sweep dirt under the rug before the media caught the scent. "Director Lawson," she said, voice dropping to a glacial chill, "do not mistake my calm demeanor for a willingness to be placated. This is not an internal matter. This is a blatant civil rights violation caught on camera by a dozen bystanders, perpetrated by an officer who felt entirely comfortable referring to me as trash, while his hand rested on his taser." Lawson visibly blanched, eyes darting to Jenkins. He drew a weapon on you?" "He pointed a live taser at my chest when I prevented him from committing a federal crime under the Espionage Act by opening my classified briefing files," Sarah stated clearly. "He did this after unlawfully detaining me without probable cause. He did this because the culture of your police force allowed him to believe he could act with impunity." Captain Carter turned slowly to Jenkins. The look in his eyes was lethal. "You drew your taser on a 4-star general over a baggage dispute." "She refused a lawful order," Jenkins cried, voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "She wouldn't open the bag because you didn't have a warrant, you absolute fool," Carter shouted, restraint finally snapping. He pointed a shaking finger at Jenkins. "Give me your badge, hand over your service weapon, your taser, and your radio right now." Jenkins froze, eyes wide with shock. "Captain, you can't be serious. I have 12 years on the force. You're going to fire me over a misunderstanding?" "It is not a misunderstanding, Bradley. It is a career-ending violation of the law," Carter snarled, stepping into Jenkins's personal space. "Badge and gun, now, or I will have the Port Authority arrest you on the spot." The air in the room thickened with the finality of a ruined career. Jenkins's hands shook uncontrollably as he unclipped his taser, placed it on the metal table, and unholstered his service weapon. He unpinned the silver shield from his chest, the same piece of metal he had used as a bludgeon against the vulnerable for over a decade, and dropped it beside the weapons. It landed with a hollow metallic clink. "General," Captain Carter said, turning back to Sarah, tone carefully measured, "the officer has been stripped of his authority. He will be suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a full internal affairs investigation. We will gladly turn over all precinct security footage to the military police or federal authorities, whichever you prefer." Sarah watched Jenkins. The towering, intimidating bully from the TSA line was gone. In his place stood a defeated, humiliated man staring at the floor, face pale and slick with nervous sweat. A small part of her, the part that had spent a lifetime defending the citizens of her country, felt a flicker of pity for how entirely pathetic he looked. But pity was not a substitute for justice. "An internal affairs investigation is insufficient, Captain Carter," Sarah said quietly, packing her classified folders back into the duffel. Officer Jenkins's behavior tonight was not born in a vacuum. He acted with the supreme confidence of a man who has done this before and gotten away with it. She zipped the bag shut and slung it over her shoulder. "When I land in Chicago, my first call will be to the Department of Justice. I am formally requesting a federal civil rights probe into the policing practices at this terminal. I want an audit of every secondary screening Officer Jenkins has conducted in the last 5 years. I want to know exactly how many people who look like me, who didn't have the rank of general to protect them, had their rights violated in this exact room." Lawson closed his eyes, rubbing his temples as a massive headache bloomed. A DOJ probe meant federal subpoenas and months of brutal media scrutiny. But looking at the resolute, immovable force of General Mitchell, he knew there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Yes, ma'am," Captain Carter said softly. "We will fully cooperate with the Department of Justice." Sarah nodded. She picked up her government phone and slid it into her pocket. Then she looked down at the heavy bronze challenge coin resting beside Jenkins's discarded badge. In the military, a general's challenge coin was an incredible honor, given only to those who demonstrated exceptional courage, brilliant tactical acumen, or unwavering moral integrity. It was a physical manifestation of a commander's respect. Sarah picked up the coin. She walked over to Jenkins, who could not bring himself to meet her eyes. "Look at me," she commanded softly. Jenkins slowly raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, swimming with fear and regret. Sarah held the coin out and pressed it flat against the center of his chest, right where his badge used to be. He instinctively reached up and took it, fingers curling around the cold bronze. "Usually I give this coin to individuals who represent the absolute best of what this country has to offer," Sarah said, voice completely devoid of anger, which somehow made the words cut deeper. "I am giving it to you for a different reason." Jenkins stared at the 4 stars etched into the metal, breathing shallow. "I want you to keep it in your pocket," Sarah told him, gaze piercing straight through his fragile ego. "And every time you touch it, I want you to remember tonight. I want you to remember the moment you realized that the uniform you wore did not make you a better man than the people you swore to protect. I want you to remember that power without empathy is just tyranny. And I want you to remember the woman in the dirty hoodie who finally held you accountable." She stepped back, leaving Jenkins frozen, clutching the coin as if it burned his hand. Sarah turned to Captain Carter and Director Lawson. "Gentlemen, I have a flight to catch." "Of course, General," Lawson said quickly, stepping aside to open the door. "We will provide an escort directly to your gate." "That won't be necessary," Sarah replied. "I know the way." General Sarah Mitchell walked out of the interrogation room and back down the sterile hallway. As she emerged into the main terminal area of Concourse T, the atmosphere shifted. The crowd of passengers who had witnessed the initial altercation was still there, many having missed boarding calls to see how it would end. When they saw her walk out alone, unbothered, head held high, and saw Captain Carter carrying Jenkins's gun belt and badge. A profound silence fell over the security checkpoint. Then the man in the business suit who had been recording started to clap. It was not a roaring ovation, but a slow, deeply respectful applause. A few others joined in, the sound echoing lightly off the high glass ceilings of Hartsfield-Jackson. Brenda Hodges, the young TSA agent who had bravely escalated the situation, caught Sarah's eye and gave a small, reverent nod. Sarah nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of the young woman's integrity. Sarah did not stop for speeches or bows. She simply adjusted the strap of her battered duffel, bypassed the standard cues, and walked toward her gate. She was exhausted. Her flight would be delayed. The terminal air conditioning was too cold. But as she walked, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had spent 30 years fighting enemies overseas to protect the freedoms of the American people. Tonight she had fought a different kind of battle on domestic soil, and as she finally settled into her first-class seat, pulling her gray hoodie tight around her shoulders, General Mitchell knew with absolute certainty that this was a victory that truly mattered. By the time her flight touched down at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, the digital world was already ablaze. The bystander in the business suit, a corporate litigator named Arthur Pendleton, had not merely recorded the altercation. He had live-streamed it. The footage captured everything. Jenkins's aggressive physical contact, his refusal to acknowledge Brenda Hodges' clearance, the sneering disrespect, and the terrifying moment he dragged Sarah toward the interrogation room with his hand on his weapon. By 6 a.m. Wednesday morning, the video had amassed millions of views. The hashtag Atlanta Airport Abuse was trending worldwide. In the immediate aftermath, Hartsfield-Jackson's general manager, Kenneth Harlan, and Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens convened an emergency press conference. They announced the immediate suspension of Officer Bradley Jenkins and promised a transparent review. But the internet had already done its own sleuthing. Within hours, Jenkins's badge number was identified, and stories from other minority travelers who had suffered under his harassment began flooding comment sections. Bradley Jenkins was not a man who knew how to surrender gracefully. Desperate to save his pension and shattered reputation, he reached out to Thomas Granger, the combative president of the local police union. Granger, known for defending indefensible behavior under the banner of officer safety, saw an opportunity to turn Jenkins into a martyr. 3 days later, on a Friday morning, as the Department of Justice officially announced its civil rights probe, Jenkins and Granger appeared on a popular, controversial local radio show. "The video is entirely out of context," Jenkins lied smoothly into the microphone, voice wavering with practiced victimhood. "I was conducting a standard randomized security check. The passenger was uncooperative. She was evasive. And let's be clear, she never identified herself as military personnel until we were in the private room. This is a case of military overreach, trying to destroy a dedicated local cop who was just trying to keep the airport safe." Granger leaned into his mic. "It's a disgrace. General Mitchell used her political weight to circumvent standard security protocols. Officer Jenkins is a scapegoat." The radio interview was a massive, calculated gamble. Jenkins hoped to rally public sympathy by portraying himself as a blue-collar worker crushed by the Washington elite. He hoped to muddy the waters enough that the DOJ would back down, calling it a simple miscommunication. He severely underestimated the tactical brilliance of the woman he had crossed. General Mitchell did not take to social media to defend herself. She did not appear on morning talk shows to cry about her trauma. Instead, she let her actions speak through the devastating, methodical machinery of federal law. In Washington, D.C., Sarah sat at her massive oak desk inside the Pentagon, reviewing morning briefing files. Her aide-de-camp, Captain David Reynolds, stood at attention, tablet in hand, playing the audio of Jenkins's radio interview. "Should we issue a statement from the Department of Defense, General?" Reynolds asked, jaw tight with barely concealed anger. "His claims are entirely fabricated." "No, David," Sarah replied calmly, signing a logistics authorization with a heavy fountain pen. "Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake. He has just publicly stated that I was uncooperative and that he was following standard procedures. He has tied his defense to official protocol." She looked up, a cold, strategic glint in her eyes. "Call Attorney General Garland's office. Tell the lead investigator to pull the Atlanta Airport Police Precinct's Security Manual, Section 4, Subsection B, and then have them subpoena the CCTV footage of the interrogation room hallway." The twist was elegant in its simplicity. Jenkins had forgotten, or in his arrogance never realized, that while there were no cameras inside the interrogation room, a high-definition camera pointed directly at the door from the hallway. That camera recorded audio. 2 days later, the DOJ released a 50-second clip to major news networks. The footage showed Jenkins shoving Sarah toward the door. His voice came through crystal clear, echoing off the tile. "You think you can play the race card with me? I know your type. You come in here wearing rags, trying to sneak into the priority lanes. People like you think the rules don't apply. Yeah, trash." The release was a tactical nuclear strike. The public sympathy Jenkins had tried to manufacture evaporated instantly. The police union, realizing they were backing a sinking ship, immediately dropped his legal representation. Thomas Granger issued a terse statement retracting his prior defense, claiming he had been misled by Officer Jenkins. Bradley Jenkins was suddenly entirely alone, caught in the crushing jaws of federal justice, and the DOJ audit had only just begun. 6 months later, in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia, the courtroom was packed, a sea of reporters, civil rights advocates, and federal marshals. The air was thick with anticipation. Officer Bradley Jenkins sat at the defense table looking utterly unrecognizable. He had lost 20 pounds, his hair was thinning, and his skin had a shallow, sickly pallor. The expensive private defense attorney he had hired with a second mortgage on his house sat beside him, looking equally defeated. The DOJ probe had uncovered a staggering pattern of corruption. The audit of Jenkins's past 5 years revealed 142 documented instances of illegal secondary screenings. Over 90% of those targeted were Black or Hispanic travelers. Jenkins had routinely confiscated cash under dubious civil asset forfeiture claims, destroyed legal documents, and intimidated passengers into silence. Because General Mitchell had refused to be a victim, those 142 people finally had a voice. A massive class action lawsuit was bankrupting the city's municipal insurance, and a federal consent decree was forcing the entire airport police division to undergo radical restructuring. But today was about criminal accountability. Jenkins was not merely facing termination, he was facing a federal indictment for deprivation of rights under color of law. 18 U.S.C. Section 242. General Sarah Mitchell sat in the first row of the gallery. She was not wearing a gray hoodie today. She was in her Army service uniform, the dark blue fabric immaculate, 4 silver stars gleaming on her shoulders, chest full of ribbons testifying to a lifetime of service. She sat perfectly still, posture radiating quiet, absolute power. Judge Harrison Carter, a no-nonsense federal judge with a reputation for maximum sentences for corrupt officials, looked down at Jenkins from the bench. "Mr. Jenkins," Judge Carter's voice boomed through the quiet courtroom, "in my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case of such blatant, unchecked malice. You were given a badge and a gun to protect the public. Instead, you weaponized your authority to terrorize citizens based on the color of their skin and their perceived vulnerability." Jenkins kept his eyes glued to the defense table, hands trembling in his lap. Inside his right suit pocket, His fingers compulsively rubbed a heavy bronze object. You believed that because these people were in transit, because they were exhausted, and because they lacked institutional power, they would be easy prey, Judge Carter continued. But you made a fatal miscalculation. You pulled the wrong woman out of line. The judge adjusted his glasses, looking directly at General Mitchell before returning his gaze to Jenkins. For the charges of violating civil rights under color of law and false imprisonment, I sentence you to 96 months in federal prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are remanded into the custody of the United States Marshals. A collective exhale rippled through the courtroom. 8 years. It was a staggering sentence for a police officer, a definitive message sent by the federal government. As the marshals approached Jenkins to place him in handcuffs, he finally looked up. He turned slowly toward the gallery, eyes locking onto General Mitchell. Sarah did not gloat. She did not smile. She simply met his gaze with the same unyielding, analytical stare she had given him in the airport terminal. Jenkins reached into his pocket. The marshals instantly tensed, hands moving toward their weapons. "Wait, it's just a coin," Jenkins cried out, pulling his hand out slowly and opening his palm. Resting in his shaking hand was the 4-star challenge coin. It was slightly tarnished, worn smooth by 6 months of anxious rubbing. He had carried it every single day since the incident, a crushing physical reminder of his own hubris. "I kept it," Jenkins whispered across the aisle, voice breaking. "Just like you told me to, I kept it." "Then take its lesson with you," Sarah replied softly, voice carrying easily in the quiet room. "Your authority is gone. Now all you have left is the time to build a conscience." The marshals snapped the cuffs onto Jenkins's wrists, the harsh metallic click echoing like a gavel strike. They led him away, head bowed, the challenge coin confiscated and tossed carelessly into a plastic evidence bag by a bailiff. Outside the courthouse, the Atlanta sun was blinding. Reporters shouted questions as General Mitchell descended the marble steps, flanked by her security detail. "General Mitchell, does this verdict bring you closure?" a CNN reporter called out. Sarah paused at the door of her waiting black SUV. She looked at the cameras, expression solemn but undeniably resolute. "This verdict is not about closure for me," she stated clearly. "This is about the 142 citizens who were harassed before I ever stepped foot in that terminal. Today, the justice system worked because we forced it to work. Let this stand as a reminder. No one is invisible, and no one is above the law." She stepped into the vehicle. The tinted door slid shut behind her, leaving the chaotic media circus behind. Later that evening, back in the quiet sanctuary of her Pentagon office, Sarah stood by the window, looking out over the Potomac River. The world was slightly fairer today. The airport in Atlanta was implementing new oversight boards. Brenda Hodges, the young TSA agent who had tried to intervene, had been promoted to a supervisory role, and a tyrant with a badge was sitting in a federal holding cell. Sarah reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a fresh, newly minted bronze challenge coin. She turned it over in her hand, feeling the weight of the 4 stars. True leadership, she knew, was not about the power you wielded over others. It was about standing as a shield for those who had none. She placed the coin on her desk, ready for the next battle, knowing she would never stop fighting for the invisible. General Sarah Mitchell's story is a masterclass in emotional intelligence, tactical patience, and ultimate justice. She did not merely punish a corrupt cop. She dismantled a broken system and gave a voice to more than 100 victims who had been silenced by fear. True power is not about yelling the loudest or abusing a badge. It is about standing your ground with quiet dignity and letting the truth expose the bullies. Jenkins learned the hard way that you cannot judge a book by its cover, especially when that book literally wrote the manual on military strategy.